Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and hello, and welcome to another episode of the Chai Chat podcast. I'm your host, Dawood Jafree. Today, I have some very special guests with you to share a lot of information about what's going on in the world. Has the world gone crazy? What is COVID-19? What is this pandemic? What is this virus that's been going around? I'll introduce my guests on the podcast today. Firstly, we have Sheikh Jafar Ladak. Sheikh Jafar is the resident alim at Hujjat in Stanmore in London. He's the imam of the mosque, and he has been leading the congregation there for several years now. But he's also been involved with contemporary Islamic studies, not just in the UK, but also across in Iraq as well at the seminary in Karbala. So welcome, Sheikh.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.
Wa alaikum assalam. We're very glad to have you. We also have a couple of medics on the podcast today with us. Namely, my previous co-host, Dr. Kazim Ali Shan. I'd like to welcome him. Dr. Kazim is a community GP. He's been involved with healthcare for over 10 years now within the healthcare field, and he'll be giving us some insights into how the coronavirus, COVID-19, will particularly affect our communities as and the specific elements within our communities that are highly at risk. So, welcome, Dr. Kazim.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much.
Walaikum assalam. And then thirdly, we also have Dr. Fahim Naqvi on the podcast today. Dr. Faheem is a consultant psychiatrist. He's been practicing medicine for over 10 years as well now, and he will be giving us a very detailed insight into the psychology of self-isolation, what we can be doing, what the causes of loneliness can be, and how we can mitigate some of those in the current times we live in. So welcome, Dr. Faheem, as well.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Wa alaikum assalam. No worries at all. So as always, we'll begin the discussion with a bit of a preface. And the preface is particularly around coronavirus itself and what is it. So the current situation is there are over 300,000 cases of coronavirus with over nearly 13,000 deaths globally. I want to go straight in to one of the medics here. Maybe Dr. Kazim, you can let us know what is the coronavirus in layman's terms, so that a lot of people don't really understand what COVID-19 is. What's coronavirus? Is it the flu? What is it?
So putting it very, very briefly, coronavirus is a family of viruses. We have encountered these before, but the strain currently that we have is a new strain. It's called the SARS coronavirus 2, and the disease it causes is called coronavirus disease 19, or in short, COVID-19. The first identified case was in Wuhan city in China, and it has now become a global pandemic because the initial strain has mutated. And due to the way the world is now, with the travel all around the world and the close contact and the world being one big global world rather than different borders, we are now in the midst of a true pandemic, the likes of last, which was seen in 1918 when the H1N1 strain of the common cold that you see now, the flu, that was the last proper pandemic. We have had epidemics since then. You might have heard of Ebola and things like that. But the true sense of the word pandemic, I don't think many people are alive now from 1918 to be able to tell us what that felt like. So we are now in the current pandemic, which is basically another medical word for a disease which is all over the world and affecting a lot of people. Is very infectious. So that in brief is what it is. I don't want to go into too much information because I know there's a lot you want to discuss today. But it is a serious illness. There are many, many, many cases that we do not know about. Many cases because we simply aren't testing. And there's clear guidance from the World Health Organization, or WHO, who have given clear guidance to countries, of which some countries are doing much more better than other countries in trying to fight this. But yeah, I'm sure we're going to talk about in coming discussion what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched upon that. Look, it's a family of viruses. How is this different to the flu? A lot of, so everything we hear in the news is basically, look, if the average people get it, you'll just get mild flu symptoms. What's the difference between this and
I think the best way to attack this question, I get these questions a lot from the community members and patients, etc. So the best way to do it. Let me compare the two. Okay. So how are they similar? And then I'll talk about how they're different. So how are they similar? They're both viral illnesses. So they're not bacteria. Antibiotics don't help. They're both viral illnesses. They both are upper respiratory tract infections causing cough, cold, runny nose, fever, things like that. Mortality rate, the experts are now suggesting is similar because of purely the amount of cases that are not diagnosed. If you look at official figures, the mortality rate is 3.4% for the coronavirus. Compare that to the flu, it's about 1%. But really what the experts are saying is it's probably similar to the flu because we just don't know how many people have COVID-19. So that's where the similarities are. What are the differences? Well, the flu the flu is caused by a virus called influenza A or B. That's the name of the virus that causes it. Whereas COVID-19 is caused by, as I alluded to earlier, in layman terms, the coronavirus. It's two different type of viruses. How is it different? We have very vast experience with the flu. We have good vaccination programs against the flu. We have studied the flu. We know what it's an enemy, yes, but we know what the enemy is. Whereas coronavirus or the COVID-19 is something what we call novel virus. It's a completely new strain of this virus. We don't know, we don't have a vaccine at the moment. We don't know which antiviral tablets work for it. We just simply don't know because it's a new strain appeared in December 2019 and we just do not know enough about it. So it's an enemy that we do not know about and that's what makes it so dangerous.
Okay, interesting. So maybe I'll put out there what the state of the world currently is. So as I mentioned, over 300,000 cases globally, and I really want to put it in the context of the mortality issue that we want to focus on. We've had over 3,500 nearly deaths in China. In Italy, that's gone up to nearly 5,000 as of today. Yeah. Spain, here in Europe, we've got Europe has become the epicenter of this particular pandemic. Yeah. We have sites in Iran, especially in across the seminaries, where the pandemic has really taken hold, and people are being severely affected by this. Life as we know it has changed completely. We feel it here in the UK. I don't even want to experience what can be like for people in Wuhan or people in Italy who are currently in lockdown. Even people in Iran, there's a huge global impact that's taken place because of the pandemic as it stands. I want to bring Sheikh into the conversation now and maybe talk a little bit about socially. Everything we've been advised to basically shut down in terms of our mosques here in the UK. Muslim sites globally have basically come to a halt, where there's no ziyarah taking place, there is no Hajj, there's no Umrah that's going to be happening. How does this sit within the Islamic framework, as you know?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We have an obligation in Islam to protect life. So in all schools of thought, Shia and Sunni, there is what is known as the maqasid al-Sharia, the higher goals of the divine law. And amongst those are things like to protect one's wealth. The law should be there to protect the deen. But amongst the things that are protected, what is known as ihtifadh al-hayat, to protect life. So because we realize this strain of virus is so dangerous, especially for certain age groups, and when we congregate together in places like our masajid, our Husayniyat, we are more likely to be passing this virus on. It is imperative that we keep ourselves in what we call social distancing, and that would include things like temporarily closing down our places of worship where we would communally gather. So this is not problematic. This is actually something that would be wajib upon us. If it's going to cause death, if it's going to cause harm, we have a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he says, "La dharar wa la dhirar." Islam does not occasion harm. Harm is prohibited from coming to you, or you have to minimize harm wherever possible. So closing down the mosques would be required, and all those mosques that have followed these guidelines are to be praised and championed. We also know that there are some mosques that still in the UK have not followed suit. We encourage them all to follow the guidelines, which is in line with the government-like guidelines and also Sharia guidelines as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sheikh, are there any fatwas that have come out from some of the grand scholars out there that have ordered this to happen, or is this just a community-led initiative that we're following?
If you look at all of our sanctified sites in the Islamic world, you will see that all of them have taken either similar steps or have led in this in particular ways. So, for example, we know that in Masjid al-Haram, Masjid Nabawi in Mecca and Medina, the shrines have closed down. The masjid, the two great masajid of Islam have closed them down. We see that there is distancing. People are not being allowed to participate in normal worship that's being done there. Or, for example, in Iran, we've seen the shrine of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam has been closed as well. And the head figure of the shrine, the wakil of the shrine, actually movingly came out with a sermon the other day, and he was crying, and he said that every day when I come for my ziyarah to a closed shrine of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, I cry and I seek forgiveness from Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, saying to him, I apologize for having to close down the shrine, which prohibits, zawar, visitors, pilgrims to come and visit you. But this is required. So we see across the Muslim world, all of the scholars, I'm talking leading scholars, are not just speaking about doing this, but acting on this as well. And actions are, speak louder than words. So this is something that we can all unite around through the actions of those people who are leading the various different holy and sanctified shrines around the world.
Okay. Sheikh, I'd like to probably just develop on that point a little bit. So you've mentioned the holy sites have been pretty much put on lockdown. There's been good leadership coming in from the top to actually close these sites down and implore people to isolate and stay at home. I want to maybe take it down to more of a micro level individually. What is our responsibility as Muslims in this current environment? What should we be doing? Should we just blindly be following the government's advice? Should we be doing a lot of our own research into what other countries are doing and maybe try and follow that? What should we be doing personally ourselves?
So we have two sets of obligations here, and in theory, neither of them should conflict at any time. But there may be times when they do conflict. So let's give the two guidelines. We have, of course, the fiqhi guidelines and the moral guidelines that we would have as obtained from Quran, Sunnah, and from our great leading scholars. We also have the law of the land and the government advice that's being given to us. In theory, we would like to think that these two don't conflict. Now, in regards to the first, we have all the precedents set in the Quran and in the Ahadith and in the history of Islam in regards to disease, in regards to times when the Muslim community been faced with famine, and how the Muslim community was expected to react in terms of things like the issue of hoarding, panic buying, sharing food. All of this has taken place at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, and even the Imma of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam afterwards. So we have guidelines from that, which we can talk about in specific. But then your question was, what should the Muslim community be doing? Should we be following government advice? Now, of course, we going to have experts here on the panel, and I'm sure you will have your own opinions about some of the government advice, whether you've agreed with some of the nudge ideas and the nudge effects that they have been suggesting, herd immunity and other matters, whether we should be following other countries' examples. But principally, if the government advice is sound, then of course we would be obligated to be following it. Where we have certain evidence to suggest that we might need to act ahead of government advice, or we might need to be able to look at other governments and examples, that doesn't mean that we're going against government advice. It just means that we're able to tabulate a whole other spectrum of advices to us. And I think because what people have been seeing occurring in Italy, occurring in Spain, they've been a little bit more cautious than even some of the government advice has been. So I think principally we need to understand what the government is advising us, but that doesn't mean that we close our ears and close our eyes to what has been taking place elsewhere.
Okay, that leads us on perfectly to, I'm going to go into Dr. Faheem now, and maybe Dr. Faheem, just give us a bit of an overview of the UK strategy, and you as a NHS worker at the front line. What is the UK strategy to combat COVID and the virus as a whole, especially focus across the NHS system, because that's exactly what we have. That's the limitation that we have to deal with, right? So maybe explain that in a bit of detail, and then we can go into some of whether it's a good strategy or not.
Taking a step back, Kazim did a really excellent summary of coronavirus, and I just want to start on the fact that, as Kazim said, that in 2003 there was a SARS outbreak, which the mortality rate was much lower. I mean, the mortality rate was higher, but it was much less. The infection rate was much lower, but still, you know, less than 1,000. It was less than 1,000, but substantial people died from SARS in 2003. But it's interesting that in 2006, the World Health Organization identified that SARS is this coronavirus is a virus that can come back. And it's a virus that we should be researching and we should be looking into in more detail. However, that didn't happen. We spent billions of pounds on other priorities, for example, arms, for example, wars, things to do with the economy, but we haven't focused on the coronavirus. So I think, first and foremost, I think as a world, we've let people down by not focusing on this coronavirus as much as we should have. So that's the first point I wanted to make. In terms of the national strategy, so this coronavirus first, the outbreak was in China, and I think it was at the end of December. It's called COVID-19 because it started in 2019. And it was around December where the first cases were discovered. And I think as a world, again, I think our response was we delayed our response. Maybe we didn't know exactly how the severity of what was going on in China, but the fact that China built a hospital in 2 weeks shows you that it was very severe. In hindsight, we can say, China was so scared that they were building a hospital in 2 weeks, then definitely the severity of what was going on was quite high. So there's an example, for example, in terms of some countries, so for example, Singapore and a few other countries, they did cancel. They took much more. What do you call it? They took much more drastic action. For example, they stopped flights and they tried to take action much more earlier. And the number of cases in them countries was much lower than in other countries, like in Europe, for example, in Italy or in Germany or France and the UK. The cases that we initially got was much higher. in answering your question, in terms of, if you look at what the UK response was, the UK response to begin with was to try and allow herd immunity, allow people to get the infection, and build that immunity. But quickly they then shifted to suppressing it, and they've put in new law. For example, they've started to say that, look, you need to stop schools, you need to stop people from social segregation. So there's been a shift in their policy. Whether they should have done that earlier or not, that's another question.
Yeah. So let me just touch back on one of the points that you mentioned. So you mentioned, of course, in China they built a hospital in 2 weeks. China is known for its large workforce, its capabilities of doing large infrastructure projects like this within weeks, months, and without any question, without any sort of insight into how it's done. I think it's maybe I don't know whether we can do a direct comparison, and I don't think it's fair to do a direct comparison between the UK and the workforce that's in the UK versus what's happening in China. But I'll probably agree with you on the point that there's a lot that was done in some of the other countries, so Hong Kong, Taiwan, which really tried to suppress from the get-go. I'll bring Dr. Kazim into this particular part of the discussion, where yes, we heard a little bit about herd immunity, and we'll touch on that going forward in a bit more detail. But just before we go on to the herd immunity side of things, the UK response, knowing the limitations of the NHS, what's done is done. You can't. I think at this point it would be farcical to talk a little bit about what we could have invested into the NHS, or what the capacity of the NHS could be. Right now, seeing what the capacity of the NHS is the strategy correct? Is what the government is doing something that should be followed by other governments?
So it's excellent that you talk about this discussion. It's quite good that the host yourself, so I know you as a friend, you're an economist and work in Canary Wharf, so it's really good that you can speak from that side of things. But I have to be very serious from the medical point of view, okay? There is nothing more valuable than human life in this world that we have, right? In terms of materialistically, and even in terms of religion that Sheikh can touch on. But human life is very valuable, okay? Now, the World Health Organization has given clear guidance and has actually yesterday told certain countries off. Now, there is two responses that I've noted in the past few weeks from the countries. So you have the likes of China, Taiwan, South Korea, and they have taken what I like to call a proactive approach, okay? And you can probably talk about in that respect how they are different, their economies are different, you alluded to it, their workforce are different. They can build a hospital overnight. They can do that. Can we do that? I don't think so. Now, I understand practically what you're talking about and the implication that has, but from a medical point of view, we have to stop the spread of this infection from a medical point of view, right? Now, what you're seeing is the UK, over this past week, has taken what it was a week ago. So like, I'm on the front line. I have patients who are asking me, "Hey, Dr. Shan, I've got a cough. What should I be doing?" Initially, it went from, have you traveled to one of these countries, A, B, C, D, E? Okay, I had to ask that. And based on that, I would tell them A, B, C, D, E, management plan. That changed. We threw travel history out of the picture. Then it changed to, have you got a cough yourself? Are you symptomatic? If you're symptomatic, you need to stay home for 7 days. What about people in your house? You can go and live your life normally. We know the incubation period for this virus is anything from 3 to 5 days, and even before. So you might not know that you're holding this virus in yourself till a week after you've been exposed. And then once you get the symptoms, up till about 10 days afterwards, you are very infective. You are also when you're asymptomatic, but you are very much so infective when you are symptomatic. Coming to the strategies again. So anyway, I just wanted to give you that bit of a background from the science point of view about the infectivity. Dr. Faheem was talking about it. He alluded to what we call in medicine the infectivity rate. We actually give it an index. So just to, for example, put it into perspective, the infectivity rate of a flu is around about, if you have the flu, it's about 1.5. So you have the potentiality to infect 1.5 other people. It's a generalization, it's not exact. The infectivity rate for coronavirus is 3.4, 3.6. You can infect 3.5 other people. So anywhere between 2 till 3.5, 4 people. That's not, again, generalization. Some people don't infect that many people. The people who have a lot of viral load, too much virus in them, will affect other people. As I was saying, how did this over the past week? I'm not talking about weeks or months. Just past week, I had to change my advice based on what Boris Johnson said to, okay, now if you have symptoms, you have to self-isolate for 7 days, yet your family has to self-isolate and stay at home for 14 days. Now from yesterday, complete different, okay? Keep it the same of what the individual. However, we're gonna close down pubs, clubs, mosques shouldn't hold, mosques and churches shouldn't hold sort of mass gatherings. We're going to cancel all these events, etc., which has just happened yesterday. Basically, the UK is following suit. It is following suit, but not fast enough. And my worry is that this delayed strategy is heading the same way as China, France, Spain. We're heading there. And you will see in a few weeks' time, it will be lockdown. But will it be too late then? Maybe it's too late already, right? But right now, I think it's damage control. We need to limit as much as we can. I know you.
Okay. Let me follow up on that with you for a second. So clearly, we know this is a long-term virus. This is going to be here for maybe 6 months, maybe a year, till at least a vaccine is found.
That's right.
I know from figures in China, they now have pretty much no new cases of the virus coming out, and that's primarily been attributed to the lockdown.
To the
However,
measures they've taken.
It is a bit of an extreme measure, but I think using the China strategy, it doesn't necessarily work, because the exact same thing has been done in Italy. However, the number of cases and the number of deaths in Italy seems to still be increasing at an exponential rate.
I add something there.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, sorry. So that's a really interesting point, because Taiwan took a really strict policy. They started checking people's temperature in the airports. But now how long can you maintain that? And how long can you do that for? Because now even Taiwan has started getting cases. And then secondly, in terms of the vaccine, if you look at the SARS outbreak in 2003, we still don't have a vaccine for that.
Exactly.
So it's not necessary that we're going to get a vaccine
anytime soon.
What we probably need is we need to do the research to get a vaccine for the next outbreak or the next mutation of this, to start having a better idea how to create a vaccine for this. But it's not going to be anytime soon.
Totally agree. So my point is this exactly. So if this is going to be something that is carried out for the next 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, to the point where people will start feeling a lot of fatigue from this isolation that they've created, that we've created for ourselves. I've been at home now for a week and a half. I want to go out. I really, I'm struggling to the point where I feel like, okay, maybe if I just take a quick trip out, it will be fine. Or maybe if I just pop down to the shops, it'll be fine. There's no issues. And that's me. And my wife is a part of the NHS workforce, and I should know better. The layman out there, it's very, very difficult to be able to isolate yourself or stay at home and not have people coming over, or not have social gatherings for a prolonged period of time.
Dawood, I know it's a hard decision. It's something I don't like myself, to be able to stay at home and not go to the gym, not go and play football. it is tough. Over and above that, not being able to go to my local Jummah, not being able to attend the Dua Kumail, these are difficult things. These are very difficult things. But as I said, we just don't know enough about this this disease. We do not know enough. So we have two things there, right? We don't know about this. We know there's this enemy. We know that we don't know much about this enemy. What do? What we do know is that it is infectious. It is spreading like wildfire in the people that we have tested, right? So we have two approaches. Either try to slowly what the UK initially thought would be a good way of attacking it, put measures in as and when they arise, and we've seen in a week massive changes, or take the approach of like, okay, stop now, because we do not have enough ITU beds. We do not have enough ventilators in the NHS. We simply don't. Look at the scenes coming out of Italy. You said Italy took measures, right? And they're still having cases. Let me just give you a bit of a background about why Italy is in the state it is. Italy has the eldest generation, or one of the eldest generations in Europe, right? So a lot of comorbidities, a lot of other illnesses, right? The other thing is Italian culture. If you look at it, there's a lot of kissing, there's a lot of hugging. You know, it's very similar to the Iranian culture. So that is another possible theory of why it has spread so much. Italy's taken measures last week or within this week. You're not going to see the result of these measures up until about 2-3 weeks later. The results you're seeing in China aren't because China took what happened today. They took measures 3-4 weeks ago, and now you're seeing the effect of it. So I think it's unfair to say that Italy took that measure and still having cases. Yes, it is right now, but in a couple of weeks, it'll be different.
Okay. And so, fine. From that, I totally understand. We still need to contain the virus.
Yeah.
And it's our responsibility at this point to be able to contain the virus. It's to be able to restrict ourselves from going out there and spreading it out. But it's a very, very difficult thing to ask. And that's why I want to maybe switch topics a little bit to this whole self-isolation. How do we stay sane at home, looking at within the same four walls that we live in? I don't know, maybe exercising a little bit, but at the same time, with this lack of social interaction, how do we stay somewhat sane within that? Both from a spiritual aspect, and that's what I'll go into Sheikh Jafar on, and then but also medically, and Dr. Fahim, and I'll take your inputs on that as well. But I want to go into the Islamic side of things first, and spirituality. In terms of the self-isolation side of things, Sheikh, we are at home. What should we be doing? Maybe you can share some of your experiences, and maybe experiences of the ulama of the past who did this, who spent nights and days locked up in a room just researching stuff, and how they found energy to be able to do that.
Ahsant. So the first thing is to ask ourselves about isolation in Islam. Isolation in Islam is something that is generally prohibited, or withdrawal from society is generally prohibited, except in certain circumstances, like when we need to protect our faith, such as when the companions of the cave, Ashab al-Kahf, from chapter number 18 of the Quran, withdrew from society in order to protect themselves, their faith, when they were forced, or people were trying to force them to believe in the Trinity. Or to protect your life, again, there is the requirement of withdrawal and many other reasons. And what you'll find is in the history of Islam that you have examples of the great leading imams of history when they've been forced into isolation or forced into imprisonment, and the attitude that they brought to that imprisonment was something so beautiful. It allows us to be able to reflect whether we have the same attitude in our own isolations. So for example, the seventh Imam of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam, Imam Musa al-Kazim alayhi salam, when he was forced into imprisonment, which was about 25 years of his life, he responded very famously by saying, "Oh Allah, you know, I have sought time to exclusively devote myself to your worship." So now that I've been forced into this scenario, I thank you for that. So when we talk in a minute from the psychological perspective, good mental health, the spiritual and the psychological mental health actually can work in tandem here, because you can see Imam was grateful to Allah for the circumstance in which he was put into. He saw it as a benefit and not as a trial. And so that healthy attitude would be something very important to talk about. Elsewhere, we have, for example, a hadith, the fourth Imam, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, is narrated to have said, if I was to be stranded on a desert island all alone, so long as I had the Quran with me, I would not feel lonely. And what he's basically saying is that really he has communion with Allah, and Allah is the master of the universe. So he actually has the universe in communion with him, because the Quran is a reflection of reality, a reflection of the whole universe. So again, he wouldn't feel lonely. So we also have to realize that we live in a world that is related to alam al-ghayb as well as alam al-shuhud. Alam al-shuhud is the world that we experience now, the world that we witness. The world that we witness is encompassed by alam al-ghayb and the world that we don't see. It's not that alam al-ghayb is yet to come. Alam al-ghayb is living simultaneously with alam al-shuhud, but we may not realize it. Now that means that as much as the malaika are present, also the shayateen are also present. And so if we wish to be able to make our spaces of isolation, our houses in which we are self-isolating in, our rooms, blessed, then we also need to act in a certain way that drives out the shayateen. So for example, the ulama ask us, how do we make our houses mubarakan, blessed, these spaces? And they'll say things like making sure you recite Quran on a daily basis. For example, for us to recite the adhan, or to have the adhan recited, like from our phones, from YouTube, at the salah time of awwal waqt. That drives away the shayateen. It keeps the house blessed, the aura, the spiritual aura of the house blessed. We also want to be organizing our day in such a way that our day is maximized. Returning to our seventh Imam Musa al-Kazim alayhi salam, he said that you should divide your day into 4 parts. He said one part of your day should be for your wajibat, one part of your day should be for your halal rizq, one part of your day should be for your family and friends, and one part of the day should be for your halal pursuits. So we need to make sure that we are fulfilling all 4 of these, and not doing 2 of them or 1 of them or 3 of them, because otherwise our day is not going to be holistic.
Yeah.
7th Imam alayhi salam also said, he who does not take account of himself at some part of the day, فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا, he's not from us. So there's a number of spiritual practices that we can be doing to ensure that our day is organized. The last thing I'll say is that we often say things like, I don't have time. I don't have time to finish that project, or I've always wanted to read this book, I just don't find the time for it. Well, now you have all the time in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah? Whatever you want to achieve, you really do have the time for it now. Because all of us are locked away for so many hours of the day comparatively, you need to make a plan. I think the scholars here, the doctors here have been saying that this could last 3, 6, 9 months. Well, what are you going to do with these 6 months? What do you want to achieve? For some people, they've always wanted to write a book, so write it. Some people, they wanted to read a series of things, so do it. They wanted to study a particular subject, do it. And in fact, many of the international institutions have opened up their books to be available for free, courses available for free. Don't let your mind become stagnant. Make sure you try to get in some exercise. You are walking around, even if it's outside. The doctors will confirm, I think, that you're allowed to go out for exercise. That it still includes social distancing. Keep your mind and your heart healthy spiritually, and all of it will come together, inshallah.
Ahsan, Sheikh. So I'll pick up one of the points that Sheikh mentioned, and we'll use that to translate onto the other side of the mental health framework, and that really picks up on the attitude shift. And the attitude shift really needs to come in from the beginning of the process. Faheem, maybe you can give us an insight into some of the work that you do with patients and people across the NHS as a psychiatrist. how do we build our mind into some sort of an arena of focus, firstly, and secondly, how do we bring about such a change of mindset with with whatever we're seeing around us?
This is very difficult, and it's something that we're not used to be doing as human beings. If we look at what we're being asked to do, we're being asked to cut off social contacts, to stay indoors, and that goes against our own brains and how our brains have developed. Our brains are very different to other mammals in the fact that we have a social brain, and our social brain is really developed. So I'll give you an example. Our brains, our human brain, doesn't stop developing until the age of 25. And the part of the brain that develops right at the end is the prefrontal cortex, or the frontal lobe of the brain. And that brain is all about making contacts with people, talking to people, thinking, having that higher level of thinking, that theory of mind of how I'm feeling or how that other person is feeling, looking at different points of views. And a big part of our capacity is that takes a lot of the energy from our brain in doing things like that. And now we're being asked to, cut off socially. And that can be really difficult, because if you think about us as a child or a baby, when a baby is distressed, to seek comfort, it seeks its mother to give the child comfort. In the same way, this is a distressful and anxiety-provoking situation for lots of people. And you want to have that social contact to get ease and to feel better. But when that's being cut, that can be really difficult. So that's an important point. In terms of, I've been reflecting on it myself, and if we put things in perspective, what we're experiencing is not. There's much more worse things than what we're experiencing now, but we can compare it to them. For example, I've been feeling quite entrapped that our social contacts, we're not as meeting with people socially as we used to. We're not traveling as much as we used to travel, and that makes me feel quite entrapped, and it does have an effect on my mental health.
Yeah.
For example, if I start having symptoms, then I have to self-isolate for 7 days or 14 days, and that would be really difficult for me. I've not come to that point, but if I have to, then I would find that really difficult. But then, if you think about, if you relate this to someone who's in an abusive relationship with a partner, or if you think about a child who's got abusive parents, or if you think about someone, for example, a lot of our friends, within the community maybe have come from Iraq. They've got recollections of being under Saddam and family members being killed and martyred, and that kind of trauma went on for years in Saddam's Iraq, or for example in the household, and that sense of fear and entrapment lasted for years. And that's on a different level, completely to a different level. But I think as a psychiatrist, I felt that maybe I can relate to that a bit more through what's going on now, because I'm feeling quite entrapped. And we know every day we're looking in the news that, the amount of people dying in Italy is going up. The amount of people dying in Spain is going up. The mortality rate in France is going up, and it's getting closer and closer to the UK, isn't it? So it is a very traumatic event in that sense, and it is something that does have an effect on each and everybody's mental health and causes anxiety.
So are you saying that if we look at it with the mindset of some sort of comparison to a traumatic incident, or in relation to some sort of real trauma that people face, that will help us deal with it and help people deal with it better? Is that how our brains work?
So that's just explaining that maybe how our brains may react, because our brains also, we're designed to be socially connected. When we're in distress, we're designed to want to seek support. And in this what's happening currently means that it's harder for us to seek that support, or when we're struggling to have that social connectivity, that community where we can try and talk about our difficulties. But I did also want to put it in perspective that what we're experiencing is still, quite, is not as, if you think about it in terms of trauma, there are more severe traumas that go on, isn't there? So Dawood, I think, were you asking about what we can do?
Yeah. So how do we? So Sheikh mentioned that, look, you need a change of attitude, right? And how I'm trying to figure out, how do we bring about that change of attitude? What do we need to be thinking about, to be doing from a non-religious perspective, to be able to bring about that change of attitude?
Yeah, so I think what we need to be doing is we need to be disconnecting from social media. We need to be disconnecting from that constant stream of news and fake news that's coming on, for example, WhatsApp groups, or constantly reading the news. I think that's one thing that we can do. The other thing that would be quite useful is to keep connected with people, like I said, but with our own families, but also through our extended family. Maybe not face to face, but maybe what we can do is talk to them via phone, or do a video call via WhatsApp. So they're the kind of things that we could be doing. And also, as Sheikh Jafar Ladak mentioned, by having a balanced, making sure that in our day we're doing everything that we need to do to sustain a healthy lifestyle. So, for example, making sure that we sleep well, make sure that we have a set time for sleeping and waking up, making sure that we're eating well and eating healthily, make sure that we're doing our, we're giving time for work, we're giving time to socialize with our own immediate families, and also that we're doing some ibadat, we're doing some reflection and meditation as well. Okay,
good, excellent. I want to move on a little bit from this particular topic, because I'm conscious of time as well. I want to move on to a little bit more of a discussion specifically around the mortality issue when it comes to the coronavirus. From the sounds of it and the way things are going, a lot of people in the UK will get it. And I want to maybe mention the new law that the government's brought in, where a deceased person and their particular body the government has all rights over that particular body. So I want to bring Sheikh into this part of the discussion, and probably yourself as well, Dr. Kazim. The community, the Muslim community as a whole, of course, we have our specific rituals and our rites on the burial process, and of course, ranging from the ghusl all the way through to the actual burial itself, and the recitations that are taking place. But the new law that's come in stipulates that if the government wants, they may be able to cremate these bodies. What is the Islamic viewpoint on this, Sheikh? And what can we do?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I don't think the law has come in yet. I think my understanding is
on Monday,
in the week coming, they are due to probably vote this law in. That's correct.
Yeah.
So I think, having read a little bit around it, I think even the government realized that this is a huge exception. It's very unlikely that we will get to that situation, but of course we are asking, in the event of that, what is the case? Now, when I say that there are a number of exceptions, even in the wording of the law, it's saying that it's based on lack of storage space or lack of burial space. Now, in the Muslim community, for the majority of communities, I imagine that they have access to multiple burial plots. Maybe they have their own burial plots. And in terms of access to storage space, there is generally access to storage space either in public coronary outlets or in private outlets as well. Now, in a pandemic like this, you can imagine that the government has to bring in sweeping laws that provides for any potential outcome. That doesn't mean that the Muslim community needs to panic or think that it's under pressure in regards to one of these potentialities. What we do know is that the Muslim community up and down the country is in regular contact with local authority, and local authority is very, very understanding and very, very sympathetic to different religions that prohibit things like cremation. I know Christian communities would have this prohibited. Definitely the Jewish community prohibits cremation, and of course the Muslim community. And I think that in the vast, vast majority of cases, you will not find that this law needs to be brought about. It is only there in the potential of there being a lack of burial space or being unable to hold bodies properly in holding places. Now, as we stated, it's talking about a potential eventuality, a potential that might come as the last resort. Assume now that the government does try to take over the management of burying a particular individual because of lack of space. I imagine what you'll find is that the whole religious community would be up in arms about this. Imagine tomorrow it was a fellow Jewish member of the community whose body was being taken by the government. I imagine the whole faith-based community would rally round to say that we don't allow this to happen. There must be some burial plot somewhere around for us to be able to bury in accordance with our laws. Similarly, I imagine if a Muslim is undergoing this, the Jewish community would rally round because we are all in this together, and that one community, if it happens to one, it will happen to another community. So I imagine in terms of eventualities, we would all work together to make sure that the cremation doesn't occur. If in the last resort, they did try to adopt management of the burial and try to cremate a body, then I'm sure that this would be, of course, this is haram for us to participate in. No Muslim would want to participate in allowing this. We would object to it. We would probably end up going to the courts, and the court procedure would take so long that we would end up finding some space to be able to bury the marhum, the departed anyway. I can't imagine that this would ever take place in a real world scenario unless we're talking an apocalyptic scenario.
Sure. So that's the hypothetical type of apocalyptic scenario. Fine. But there is now a real possibility that something, of course, not as extreme, but to the point where if a Muslim does get the virus, their family
Yes.
ends up being in isolation, for example,
Yes.
and they end up passing away from this particular disease. The family isn't allowed to come out of isolation to be able to carry out the burial rites. How should we as a community be organizing ourselves to be able to take care of that entire process for them and be really sort of proactive in this particular approach?
So we have a default position that says that either the understood wishes explicitly stated in a will or implicitly understood around the individual's beliefs or the community that he or she is associated to, those burial practices would be adopted by the community on behalf. So the next of kin would then take responsibility to direct those in charge of taking the burial process, the management of the burial done on their behalf, on behalf of the next of kin. And so the community would come together in order to participate in the burial rites and making sure that all the burial rites are given to as much as is possible within the guidelines of the Sharia. So we know at the moment there is a lack of PPE, there's a lack of protective clothing. Unfortunately, be in hospitals or for those people who are trying to give the ghusl kafan process. But for many people, they are trying to find makeshift means. The ghusl would be given in accordance with the law as much as is possible. In absence of protective clothing, then the law says, the Islamic law says, that we would be allowed to give tayammum. The body would be placed within a bag, and to ensure that there's no transfer of the disease from the deceased to another person, and the person would complete the burial rites as normal. So either it would follow what the will says, either it would follow what the next of kin says, or there could be some sort of implicit understanding as to the association of his beliefs and community, and they would take over the responsibility of fulfilling the burial process.
Sanjay. I'll go into to Dr. Kazim here as well, because I know, Kazim, you've been involved with the community, especially in your locality in Manchester in particular, for some time now. How is the community preparing for the virus, the spread of the virus across the community in particular? Elderly care, maybe food banks, that type of stuff. How is the community preparing there, and what should we be doing?
Excellent. So that's really good points that Sheikh and Brother Faheem mentioned. Just wanted to quickly give 2 sentences on the previous 2 points and then talk about it specifically. Number one, where you were talking about social isolation from a religious point of view and from a mental point of view, I just wanted to add from a little to that. Sheikh alluded to it beautifully by Imam Kazim alayhi salam's religion. This is your opportunity to connect with your Lord. You don't need to be in a congregation to do that, although it's recommended. But this is your opportunity. From the mental, I just want to say one thing. We're talking about first world problems. As I said before, human life is the most valuable asset you can have right now. And in my own personal experience, when I've tried to explain it to patients, they are very understanding, right? They're very understanding of the current situation. And as I said, nobody has been alive from the previous pandemic that took place in this world in 1918, right? We simply didn't see it. So it's very hard for us to contextualize what's actually happening around us, okay? That being said, I mean, as an informal thing, come on, man, this is probably the best time in history of mankind is to keep yourself in your cave. You have the likes of Netflix, you have the likes of online courses, you have everything, right? You have.
Are you recommending Netflix with Sheikh around as well?
I would recommend a certain program on Netflix which is called Ertugrul. I would definitely recommend that, which is based on the Turkish
Planet Earth.
Exactly, Planet Earth. There are very good programs on Netflix as long as they're not haram. But honestly, jokes aside, it's probably one of the best time in human history you want to stay at home. You can talk to people on Netflix. We're sitting here in our own homes having a podcast, right? So it's not that bad staying at home. It's first world problems, right? Secondly, you were talking about, this whole burial thing, right? Look, government policy, and this was my problem with the UK policy in the past week, right, was it has to be based on sound scientific evidence or research or information, right? When the UK came up with all these policies of, herd immunity and all of this stuff, scientists around the world, as the World Health Organization, have asked the question on what scientific basis are you basing this, right? We're yet to hear that response. Yet I'm to read on that response, at least I can say. So burial, about this cremation and burning the body, if there is scientific, as far as we know right now, the disease is spread via respiratory droplets, okay? It's an airborne virus. A dead body is not breathing, right? So how is that going to spread it? Yes, be careful, wear gloves, etc., things like that, and do wear protective equipment. But at the moment, from the scientific point of view, it makes no sense. It actually makes counter sense. It's all complete opposite. If you burn that body, right, you're actually releasing them diseases into the air. So anyone around that area in the immediate is actually at risk of having this germ. All hypotheses at the moment. My point is, if that is to happen, we will ask the government the scientific basis, and it has to be sound scientific basis that is proven internationally, not just locally or nationally. And we will ask that question. And if they cannot be provided, then they have no reasons or grounds to make that law. Okay. The last part you were talking about regarding the community, I want to give a very good heartfelt thank you to all of the communities, whether they are Muslim or non-Muslim. you're seeing on the news, you're watching on the news, people have individually taken it on as on their own responsibility. I'm in a lot of groups where there's a lot of non-Muslims, and they have literally made these literally postcards and letters and dropped it off to their neighbors saying, if you need us to pick up any groceries for you or pick up medicines, let us know and we can do that. And so it goes out to the British people, you know, in the time of real need, they've stepped up. And it's amazing work what they're doing. Just watching in South Africa, there's a Muslim based organization who are starting to give soaps and sort of tissue papers and things like that, basic hygiene things to the slums in South Africa. So where the government's failed in South Africa, they have stepped up. Regarding even more locally in Manchester, the Imam Mahdi Awareness Campaign, IMAC, has set up a helpline for all the areas in Manchester, so Trafford, Stockport, Cheetham Hill, all of these different areas where you can contact a number and they will help you. So if you're socially isolating yourself, they will pick up your groceries, help you out. At the moment, with the limitations there are in the community, they are prioritizing the most at need, the most socially isolated. So for example, people who have no family and are individual, they don't have any vaccine, put it that way. So there is a lot of good things happening in the community, all over the community.
Nice. Okay, so I know we're running out of time pretty quickly here, so it's probably the last thing that I'll ask you guys, and we'll take it on a much lighter note. You touched on the topic of Netflix. Sheikh, one recommendation from Netflix other than Planet Earth?
I actually don't have Netflix.
Okay. Any other online streaming service that you may have?
I actually don't have any online. I'm not a caveman, honestly. But
and you see the books behind in Sheikh. That's
yeah. I was going to say, just pick one of these. I'm sorry, you can't borrow from my library.
Okay.
No, you know what? I would say probably if I'm going to watch something, I would try to watch something like maybe one of Sheikh Shomali's series from YouTube, or maybe Sheikh Bahmanpur's series on YouTube, either a tafsir or something theology. But if you're going to watch a good TV series, my favorite TV series will probably be Newsroom. The Newsroom, which was looking at how the news is created and how we can actually have a better understanding of corporate news that is there to actually beguile us. It's on HBO, my favorite series of all time.
Okay. And Dr. Faheem, what are you watching?
Again, I'm not much of a streamer, but on Netflix I have seen Messiah, which is quite interesting. But
controversial.
Controversial. It's definitely not factual, but I guess it's entertainment. Just I wanted to make a final point as well, that I think what we all should remember is what we're being asked to do is to safeguard those people who are the most vulnerable in society. And it can be very anxiety provoking what we're being asked to do. But what we need to remember is that there's a reason for why we're being asked to do what we're doing. And that is to protect the people who are weak, who have weak immune systems, who are elderly. And these are the people where the mortality rate is much higher. So we need to take heed in the message that we're being given. I know of people going to weddings in recent days. I think we need to be very careful that we're saying to the people that are around us that we need to really comply with what the government is telling us to do. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Nice. Okay, and Dr. Kazim, finally, what are you watching?
Oh man, there's so much.
Just one. We only want one.
What? Sheikh alluded to Sheikh Shomali's lectures. They're excellent. He's got tons of lectures on there. So from the religious point of view, you could do that. From scientific point of view, there's so much on YouTube, right? As long as you're watching non-haram content, I approve it, man. Mukhtar Nama, start watching Mukhtar Nama. There's so much. Come on, what are you guys talking about, man? There's so much to watch.
Just to let you guys know, I will be watching Chai Chat podcasts.
All right, shout out to Chai Chat. Yes.
Exactly. So thank you very much indeed to all three of my guests today. Sheikh, it was a pleasure having you.
My honor. Thank you for inviting.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us and your very key points on how to stay spiritual and stay sane in these times. And thank you to both Dr. Faheem and Dr. Kazim as well for your insights from a medical background and from the community that you're in as well. So from our side, all we can say is everyone within the community stay safe, follow the guidelines that are being issued, and inshallah we'll be back again with another episode of Chai Chat. Hopefully we'll try and do it in person if possible, with some sort of distancing. If not, then this virtual world is something that we're going to have to get used to. So we'll see you again either way, inshallah, soon, very soon. Assalamu alaikum.